Neither side seems to be budging. The latest on negotiations to end the partial government shutdown. Raising money for a border wall. We'll talk with the man behind the multi-million-dollar sourcing campaign. And how this Pacific Northwest city is working to reach out to those struggling with poverty. That and more tonight on Faith Nation. The president wants to talk border security. Democratic leaders say they'll have that conversation after the government is reopened. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Amber Strong. The president continues to dig in on his calls for more border security. This afternoon, he met with Democratic and Republican lawmakers in the Situation Room to discuss the issue. That meeting didn't last long.
Again, we saw a temper tantrum because he couldn't get his way and he just walked out of the meeting.
I want to clarify a few things as I just listened to Senator Schumer. I know he complained the time that you had cameras in the meeting. I think we need to bring them back.
Earlier in the day, while signing an anti-human trafficking bill, President Trump said the fight to end trafficking won't succeed without the border protection he is pushing for in those shutdown negotiations.
So many good things are happening, but we have to take care of the border. We cannot defeat the menace of international human trafficking if we do not secure our border. And Assistant Attorney General.
After that bill signing, the president made his way to Capitol Hill, meeting Republican leaders to discuss border security and the partial government shutdown. And that's where we find our very own congressional correspondent, Abigail Robertson. Abby, the president is waiting for Democrats to kind of blink in this fight over the border funding. Once he arrived there to Capitol Hill, he said he'll let the shutdown go on as long as it takes. But what are you hearing from lawmakers?
Well, Amber, his meeting on the Hill was a little more successful than the one this afternoon. He met with Republican senators for over an hour. And coming out of that meeting, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that all Republican senators are supportive of the president. They believe border security is very important. But we do know of at least one Republican senator, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who's known to be more moderate. She's publicly said she believes the rest of the government should reopen while the border security negotiations continue. And she came out of that meeting and she told reporters that she told the president that federal employees are really starting to see the consequences of this shutdown. And he apparently replied to her that Republicans need to stay unified around this border security negotiation, which was a message that he reiterated to reporters right after coming out of the lunch. Take a look.
The Republicans are unified. We want border security. We want safety for our country.
And while Republicans do seem to be unified on border security, we are seeing more and more break with the leadership, saying that they believe the government needs to reopen with or without the wall, even though they support that.
Abby, all of today's back and forth over border security comes just a day after the president took over primetime programming for an Oval Office address, prompting a rare televised response from Democratic leaders. Our colleague Ben Kennedy has that side of the story from the White House.
President Trump said this could all be worked out in a 45-minute meeting as he tries to hash out a deal with lawmakers on what he is calling a crisis of the heart.
My fellow Americans.
Behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office, President Trump took his case for a border wall directly to the American public.
This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul.
Trump said the southern border is a pipeline for illegal drugs, gangs, and human traffickers. He stopped short in declaring a national emergency, but demands a $5 billion wall and additional funds for more agents, judges, and humanitarian aid.
Democrats in Congress have refused to acknowledge the crisis, and they have refused to provide our brave border agents with the tools they desperately need to protect our families and our nation.
Democrats push back on that claim, saying a wall is not the answer.
This president just used the backdrop of the Oval Office to manufacture a crisis stoke fear.
The fight is hitting home for some 800,000 federal employees, either furloughed or working without pay.
The fact is, President Trump must stop holding the American people hostage, must stop manufacturing a crisis, and must reopen the government.
Trump said the federal government remains shut down for one reason, because Democrats won't fund border security.
To every member of Congress, pass a bill that ends this crisis. To every citizen, call Congress and tell them to finally, after all of these decades, secure our border.
Now, President Trump will travel to the border Thursday to see firsthand on what he is calling a crisis. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Abigail Robertson's back with us. Abby, obviously this partial shutdown is concerning to Americans, and most are putting the blame on Republicans and the president. Is that right?
Yes, Amber. Politico released a poll this week of about 2,000 voters that they polled who they say were Republicans, Democrats, and independents to see who they are blaming for the shutdown. And their results showed that 47% said that they blame President Trump, 5% blame congressional Republicans, and 33% blame the Democrats. Another interesting statistic they polled is of those voters, they found that 42% view the situation at the border as a crisis. But of those who identify as Republicans, 72% think the situation at the border is a crisis. So that number shows that the president might really be playing to his base by not compromising until he gets that money for the border wall.
Yesterday, you reported on the possibility of people not receiving food stamps during the shutdown, but there's some good news on that end.
Yes, we have learned today that the Department of Agriculture has said they have found reserve funds that they will fund food stamps through February. Now, if the shutdown extends, they don't know if they can keep it funded through March, but the 39 million people who rely on that benefit will get that funding in February. And also on a call earlier today with faith leaders, the vice president told about 200 faith leaders that they are talking to other agencies like the Housing and Urban Development to make sure that other Americans who rely on financial benefits do not lose those because of the shutdown. And they're working with those agencies who, although some of them are affected by the shutdown, they're trying to make sure that the low-income Americans who depend on some of these financial benefits do not go without them.
Thanks, Abby. Our CBN News political analyst David Brody is here. Oh my gosh, fireworks today in the Oval Office or in the Situation Room. What did you make of that meeting?
I don't even know where to begin. We're going backwards, and we're going backwards fast. I don't think there's any question about that. Who's going to budge? Nancy and Chuck. Chuck and Nancy, they're not going to budge. The president's clearly not going to budge. You know who probably is going to end up budging? GOP Republicans who are known for budging. That's what they do. They're squishy Republicans, rhinos, call them whatever you want. But these are the folks you got to watch out for if you are part of Trump's base. Those are the folks that Nancy and Chuck and Nancy, I get it all confused. No, I don't. They believe that that's the next frontier, that they will go after the Republicans and say you've got to abandon your president, and we'll see what happens. This was nasty, Amber, nasty today.
Why is that? Is that a working strategy? Because there's an optics game here, right? Mm-hmm. As Abby reported, there right now people are blaming the Republicans and the Democrats. Is this a losing strategy? The Republicans are fearful that eventually, we're going to start to look like the bad guys here.
Typically in the past, Republicans have lost shutdowns, and that's typically how it's been. So they are wary of what this is going to look like. Trump doesn't, how do I say this? I'm going to say it nicely. Don't worry, it's Faith Nation. Doesn't give a rip. I mean, that's basically the bottom line. And so Chuck and Nancy have never experienced this before. A Republican president is actually sticking to his guns and finding out what will happen here. Look, can I do an analogy? Do you mind?
Go for it. That's what you're here for.
Thank you. I have no props at all. But it's like ice cream, right? The wall is ice cream, right? Trump says, I want a whole gallon of ice cream. And Chuck and Nancy say, we're not giving you one scoop of ice cream. And so Donald Trump and Mike Pence and others have gone back to them and said, you know what, all right, we'll take half a gallon. In other words, $2.5 billion, half of that $5 billion. We'll take half a gallon of ice cream because that's what part of the negotiations were. And Chuck and Nancy say, we're not giving you one scoop of ice cream. And finally today, after a fourth meeting, I think it was their fourth meeting, Once again, Donald Trump says, I tell you what do you want? You know, can you give me anything? And they looked at him after 18, 19 days of the shutdown and said, we're not giving you one scoop of ice cream. Think about it. This is kindergarten. How would you feel if you just wanted a gallon and they won't even give you a scoop? You got to be frustrated. The president said, I'm out of here. I got better things to do.
Yeah, my question is, who loses here? You know, the optics of this tomorrow. We're always talking about optics. Tomorrow, when people finally, it sets in and they don't get those paychecks for the first time on a Friday, who loses? Is it the Democrats who don't want to give an inch, a dollar? Or is it the president who walked out of a meeting that could have potentially ended a shutdown?
I think the president runs the risk of losing in the short term. In the short term, I think that's the key. The question then going forward is, how much of a stomach does he have for the fight? Because I got to tell you, we know that he does have a stomach for this fight, and I think he's going to continue on for a very long time. I think what we need to watch out now is the PR battle, and what, kind of what you were saying, but also garbage in national parks building up. Are people getting their food stamps? The IRS refund? All of this stuff to the point where there'll be too much political pressure, not on Trump, but on those squishy Republicans who will say, you know what? I'm done. And that's why, you know what, it's we the people, right? Whether you're Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, you got to pick up your phone because, let's be honest, and can I say this? I know they're about to give me the hook, I'm sure. But here's the thing. Politicians are actors, and the audience is the voters. And the actors, the politicians, will decide what they will do based on what the audience says. The audience will either applaud or boo. Politicians will follow.
Guess we'll see. Time will tell.
Boy, that was deep.
Time will tell. CBN News' David Brody. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you, Amber.
All right. CBN News has learned Vice President Pence held a conference call with more than 200 faith leaders Wednesday in an attempt to rally support for the president's position on that border security. Among the influential groups on that call, Samaritan's Purse, Concerned Women for America, Priests for Life, and Christians United for Israel. White House administration sources say the vice president stressed the humanitarian effort as well as the drug crisis at the border. As the president continues to push for his border wall, some Americans are pledging money to make it happen. A GoFundMe called We the People Fund the Wall is working to raise money for the project. In just 23 days, they've raised upwards to $19 million. The goal of the GoFundMe is $1 billion. To date, more than 329,000 have contributed already. The campaign was started by Brian Kolfich. He's a triple amputee veteran and a recipient of the Purple Heart. And Brian joins me now with more. Brian, what made you decide to start a GoFundMe page to fund the president's border wall?
I was angry. I was sick of hearing the news. I just thought maybe I could make a difference, and I created the GoFundMe. And instantly, like 2 days later, it was, hitting millions and millions, and it just was going up faster and faster.
How much money have you raised so far?
We have raised close to $20 million right now, and that's not including the checks that we've received. We still have to go pick those up and have those all accounted for. So definitely over 20 million, including the checks. We were getting, millions a day, and I mean that's unheard of, especially from the amount of people that we have donating. It's never been done on GoFundMe.
Why do you think it's tapered off?
It's slowed down a bit just because at the time we didn't have our full plan in place. And I think a lot of Americans are just waiting to see what we have to roll out. People were giving up to like about $16 or $17 million right before Christmas. And that shows like how big this is. On Christmas Eve, I think we raised almost $1 million. I mean, on Christmas Day, we raised $500,000. And those numbers are the proof of how big this thing is really going to get once we roll out our plan.
What happened with Twitter?
Twitter blocked our website, wefundthewall.com. They said it was dangerous. They said it was stealing people's personal information and passwords, which was completely false. And we went to a security company and had them analyze our site, and they debunked it. We sent it to Twitter, and ultimately they were forced to backtrack and allow our website to be accepted onto their domain. It doesn't matter what you've done and what your past is. You shouldn't be going after people based on political beliefs.
Nancy Pelosi said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that she would accept $1 for the wall. You came to Washington and you tried to make her make good on that promise. What happened after that?
We know she was in there when we tried to collect that dollar. I didn't really expect that she would actually meet with me and give me that dollar. I was kind of hoping she would have an honest discussion with me about immigration. That was my general intentions, besides the dollar, was to sit down and talk to her to see like why, you know, politicians in general don't want to meet in the middle to get stuff done. They shouldn't be putting their personal agendas first. And, you know, I think Americans are just sick of it from both sides.
Brian, thanks so much for your time. Coming up, a look at how some are fighting back against state legislation that could be costly for churches. The Virginia State Legislature is back in session and taking on controversial issues like marriage and gender equality right out of the gate. 2 constitutional amendments are in the spotlight. The first is the Virginia Marriage Amendment, which defines marriage as between a man and a woman. Lawmakers will vote to repeal that. The second amendment is the proposed Equal Rights Amendment that addresses gender equality. Among other things, critics contend it could force taxpayers to pay for abortions, lead to gender-integrated prisons, and strip some churches of their tax-exempt status. Our next guest is vehemently against that measure. Victoria Cobb is the president of the Family Foundation, and she joins us now. Thanks so much, Victoria, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Victoria, what else could this Equal Rights Amendment do if it is passed?
Well, Virginia has become ground zero for this national debate over whether we would add the Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So what's happening here in Virginia has great impact on the nation. And although this should be a legally dead issue, the deadline came and went for ratification back in 1982. Those on the left have revived this as a measure to achieve so many of the liberal social policies that they would like to see, such as taxpayer-funded abortion. Also, we have grave concerns over the privacy battles that are happening in states with bathrooms, showers, locker rooms, the things where we talk about whether sports can really be separated by men and women and be able to have their own leagues, and domestic shelters. And in particular, we have concerns for churches. Our concern is that there are some places of worship, some theologies that don't have women clergy. And we have grave concern that if a strict scrutiny standard were to be applied to everything when it comes to whether genders are equal in this language, in this way, they almost have to be the same. And that really concerns us about things like the tax-exempt status for churches.
You say it could also increase car and life insurance for women. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, there's just a lot of places where at the state level, various states have set into place laws that recognize differences between men and women in actuarial tables and all sorts of things. Women and men are fundamentally different. That doesn't mean we are unequal. It simply means that we should be allowed to understand those differences and account for those differences. And we do that in places like insurance in particular, where lifespans are different, driving, everything. We have allowed those to be understood in our society, and this Equal Rights Amendment simply says, no, in order to be equal, we have to be the same. And that may have been the concept in the 1970s, but we are in the 21st century. We can embrace womanhood, and we can have equality, and we do in every area of the law without having to have sameness.
What's the likelihood of it actually passing?
Well, we are here in Virginia. They are hoping that we will be, quote unquote, the 38th state. Now, that certainly doesn't account for the states that have rescinded their ratification. But if we were to pass this, and it is certainly possible, I just rushed back from the Capitol where the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee, unfortunately by a narrow margin, just sent this on to the full Senate. It has passed the Senate before here, and then it'll move over to the House. So it is actually very possible. We are certainly gearing folks up. Many of these legislators simply think it's a symbolic statement about loving women. And if it were just that, I think we'd all be in support of it. But it's so much more and has real consequences. And that's what we're encouraging our folks to talk to their legislators. And it is a national issue, even though it's in Virginia. People need to be talking to our legislators nationwide, because it will be a matter for Congress if we turn this all over to the federal government and the courts to decide all of these issues.
Victoria Cobb with the Family Foundation. Thank you so much for being with us today, Victoria.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, how one ministry is working to help pull people out of poverty. The Bible says the poor you will have with you always, but that doesn't mean that each person has to stay that way. So people across the city in the state of Washington are banding together to help lift some of the poorest people out of poverty permanently. As Paul Strand reports, it could be a model for the nation.
My bike recently busted here in Vancouver, Washington, and a friend said you need to take it to Wheel Deal's bike shop because they're doing something decidedly different. I said, just how different can it be? Well, they're part of a movement to reach out to the down and out people here in Vancouver and lift them up.
A big part of that effort is Open House Ministries, which runs a massive shelter, as well as a coffee shop, a thrift store, and the bike shop.
We have a very, very bad neighborhood.
Mark Roscom is both Open House's chaplain and Wheel Deal's manager.
There's a lot of heroin, a lot of methamphetamine, a lot of addiction. And one thing even addicted people want is bicycles.
Renee Stevens heads up Open House, but not when she showed up at the shelter 19 years ago.
I was addicted to drugs. I was abused. I was trying to be divorced.
Stevens realizes a place like Open House can't do all it takes to get those in poverty or addiction up and out permanently.
Experts in each field need to collaborate together for one good common cause.
In Vancouver, people in food, health, housing, banking, training, and educating, or even just volunteering, are working side by side to pull folks out of poverty and dire need. Like Matt Edmonds, New Heights Church asked this.
Who are the least, the last, and the lost? And that group of individuals often find themselves uninsured. So let's open up a free clinic for the uninsured.
Edmonds himself is at the Clark County Food Bank, working with some 40 pantries and agencies, thousands of volunteers, as well as with many area grocery stores, which donate about 2 million pounds of food a year.
We find food without a home and get it to homes without food.
But the food bank also teaches people in those homes how to shop wisely, budget effectively, and cook healthier, less expensive food. And it's operating a pantry in a row of places, all trying to lift up Vancouver's down and outers.
The Lighthouse Credit Union is offering financial services and banking services to people in poverty. Right next door is our food pantry offering food assistance to people in poverty. Right next door is a housing ministry that's offering housing assistance to people in poverty.
And this kitchen next to that will soon be a training school for some of those people to become chefs and cooks. Brett Bryant is a banker who's helping Lighthouse Credit Union change the lives of its low-income customers, training them how to budget and use money and credit wisely.
You start seeing transformation in people's behaviors.
All these places and volunteers are working together just to help others.
These type of collaborations can and ought to be happening, not just here in Clark County, but across our nation.
Well, the thing is, that takes a lot of sacrificing and a lot of volunteers. Maybe you're one of those volunteers.
Edmund says those he works with get blessed richly.
They walk away saying, man, I feel filled up.
Watching people kind of transform from a place of no hope and despair to a place where they say, you know, I might have a future after all, is thrilling to me.
You see that kind of transformation in folks like Lori Richardson and her husband, lifted up by both Open House and Lighthouse. Lighthouse helped them dig out of poverty and get into a home, and both work now at Open House, helping others all day long.
It's amazing how you can just touch the lives and put hope into somebody just over a cup of coffee or a blanket.
We have non-believing partners and believing partners, but even people that are skeptical about Christianity cannot argue with the results that God is changing lives here.
Bryant asks what you'll leave behind that's permanent.
It's certainly not the stuff you have. It's the legacy you leave. It's the impact you leave. It's the ripple that goes through the following generations. And so this is some of the most permanent work I've ever done.
When you're helping a street person out, helping them out of addiction, helping them out of poverty, you're not just helping that one person, but their children and their grandchildren, and the ripples go on and on. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Vancouver, Washington.
It's an uplifting story. That's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation. We'll see you tomorrow.